Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. This channel always has been and always will be dedicated to the relatively affordable end of the watch market. The vast majority of watches that I review here cost less than $500. Now, whether that's the best new micro brands, the best of AliExpress, or the best of big brands, that's the price I try and stick to. The channel motto, after all, being you don't have to spend a fortune if you don't want to get a great watch on your wrist. But of course, I regularly go beyond that self-imposed $500 limit. I featured plenty of much more expensive luxury watches over the years, and plenty of stuff that falls into that slightly awkward $500 to $1,000 bracket. I say slightly awkward because and I'm sure you, inevitably look at these watches from the bottom up rather than from the top down. That means I find myself saying not, am I getting a luxury watch for less than $1,000, but how does this watch justify its price compared to a sub $500 watch? What am I getting here that I don't get there? And it's this perspective and these questions that I intend to bring to today's review of the Circular Super Sport Compressor. Circular are a fairly small, family-owned and operated German brand that have been around since the mid-1950s, and this is their super compressor dive watch. Now, I use the term advisedly. It actually features a compressor-style case, one that gets more waterproof the more water pressure it is put under. It is only the third genuine super compressor that I have reviewed. Now, on the bracelet, these retail for €850. That's roughly $850 plus or minus taxes, of course. So you see what I mean? It is by no means priced like a luxury watch, and yet there's a significant price increase over a more affordable watch. What do you get for your cash, and is it worth it? That's what we aim to find out today. Now, you saw the pop-up. This video is sponsored by Circular. I will therefore of course leave a link in the description of the video to their website. And my apologies to the brand owner Cornelius. He sent me this watch some time ago and has been waiting very patiently for it to get to the front of the queue. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. Okay, so we have our questions. Let's then look for the answers. For less than $500, I would be expecting a fairly simple box. For more than $500, I would be expecting something a lot like this. A bit more substantial, but not enough to worry me that too much money had been spent on it. I also appreciate the company's backstory, a small brand, previously not known outside southern Germany, but since Cornelius, the latest generation of the family, took over to run it, he's been trying to change that and broaden their appeal. And I'll never say no to another polishing cloth, a 2-year warranty, or a decent specific screwdriver for the bracelet links. All nice touches, all helping to justify the price, but all worth nothing if the watch itself is a stinker. So what do you think of it so far? But like I said, this is only the third true super compressor case that I have reviewed, the other two being by Christopher Ward and RZE. Now, the Christopher Ward cost nearly $500 more than this Circular at $1,300 US. The RZE cost $150 less at $699. I think this Circular offers almost as much as the Christopher Ward, but for a price much closer to that of the RZE. Let's have a look at the dimensions then. Well, it's a 40-20, but it's one of the biggest wearing 40-20s that I can recall. I think due to the almost square tonneau-like case shape. I'd been wearing it for an entire weekend before I measured it, and I would have sworn it was a 41 or even a 42, but it isn't. So 40mm in diameter then, with 20mm lug width. 13.6mm thick, including a piece of double dome sapphire crystal, but only 46.5 lug to lug. And on the bracelet, sized up for me, it weighs in at 162 grams. If you want to save yourself €100 and 60 grams, you can buy it on a colour matched Tropic. It weighs in at exactly 100 grams on the rubber. The case shape is definitely unusual, slightly cushion-esque, but with lugs machined to look like they're a separate component, whereas they are in fact all part of the same CNC machine mid-case. The sides of that case have a fine vertical brush to them, the fixed bezel has a circular brush, but there's also a little high polished step where it fits into the case. Two crowns, obviously, both really nice, both 6mm, both offer plenty of grip. and both have a circular indent in the middle. The 4 o'clock movement crown even has a little anodized gold coloured ring in that indent. It also has the circular logo etched into it, which is lume filled, stay tuned. Whereas the 2 o'clock bezel crown has the traditional compressor style cross hatchings etched into it. The double dome sapphire is really nice as well. It's so big and expansive because of the watch's design. There's plenty of reflection, but also enough AR that you can always see the dial and therefore read the time. And check out that case back. Can it be? Is it really true? Is that an old-fashioned diving helmet? Yeah, okay, so that's a total trope by this stage. I've seen it a dozen times, but at least it's nicely done and feels both good in the hand and on the wrist. The usual spec sheet etched in there as well, flagging the 300 meters of water resistance, the made in Germany and the Swiss movement. But because we're not a 500, it's not a Miyota, it's a Sellita. And not only that, it's an elaborate grade, and not only that, it's adjusted in Germany to tolerances of -5 to +7 seconds per day. Interesting how they gave themselves a 1 second leeway either side over COSC tolerances. This one is running just a couple of seconds slower than that per day, but very, very consistently, so I'll let it off. The bracelet is an H-link with high poly center links, and it's very, very nice. Definitely reminds me more of the bracelet that you would get on a Zin rather than a Seiko for this money. The brushing and polishing are both super smooth, the screws are small but no problem to adjust with the supplied screwdriver, and the clasp is my preferred clasp. I really like these ones, as you well know by now. Heaps of micro adjustment, machined upper and lower, fold over and triggers, yeah, just generally everything you'd want from a clasp on your watch. Well, almost everything. More on that later. But if you don't fancy the bracelet, the Tropic is pretty good. I've actually worn it on the rubber more than on the stainless steel since it arrived in Sydney. It's colour matched. This one's a kind of greeny grey blue colour. It definitely complements the colour of this specific model better than a black one would have. It's quick release just like the bracelet, so swaps are easy. Nice brush buckle and tang with the circular brand name etched into it. Bezel, definitely something I should be showing you on this style of watch, isn't it? The top crown, the 2 o'clock crown that operates it doesn't actually screw down, but it does only twist in one direction, allowing the bezel to rotate anti-clockwise. 120 click, you can feel those clicks through your fingers, but they're not particularly noisy. It does feel really good though, and everything lines up well. Dial and hands then, there is plenty going on here, but I think it all hangs together nicely. They call this colour variant the petrol. I guess that's the greeny blue dial centre section they're referring to with its sunburst effect. It's a sandwich dial as well. Those indices are cutouts. So the beaver's teeth at 12, the large tapered batons at 3 and 9, and the smaller tapered batons elsewhere, plus the half baton at 6, all cutouts. And that centre circle also features cutouts. That one is sized so that it fits perfectly the sweep of the hour hand. The hour markers on that centre circle haven't been cut out and are in yellow, the other notable colour, in addition to the petrol green. There is more yellow on the sloped internal bezel, or at least there is from the triangle round to the 20. The rest of the bezel numerals or batons are just paint filled in white or not filled at all. If I zoom right in on the bezel, you can see those little indents, which I assume go all the way around, but have been lume filled, paint filled between the triangle and the 20 and left blank elsewhere. They're a nice little touch. As is the colour match date wheel at the 6 o'clock, sitting just above Made in Germany. Now, Made in Germany doesn't mean as much as Swiss made, which doesn't mean as much as you would like it to, but it is nice to have on the dial nonetheless. The handset are relatively compact, but they do the job well enough. Segmented fence post hour and minute hand, both in brushed silver, and it's a long and slender tapered second hand, again in yellow. But with the outermost third being in white, it's not actually easy to see the colour difference in real world conditions though. Printing is kept to a minimum, just a circular brand name and Super Sport 300 meters / 1000 feet. On wrist it does wear well, but I'll say it one more time, it both looks and feels larger than the on paper dimensions would suggest. Down the wrist though, as you can see, it sits flat and flush, female end links and a short lug to lug means no problems at all on smaller than average wrists. And it's a good big piece of glass with just enough doming to keep it interesting, but not so much that things begin to distort. I'm not normally a huge fan of polycenter on a bracelet, but I think it works well here. Very Zin 104, as I alluded to earlier. That's it on the rubber, on wrist as well, by the way, just in case you're interested. I think the rubber almost accentuates that unusual case shape more than the bracelet does, but it is very comfortable and does take a chunk of weight off. Back up a little higher and on the bracelet once more. The hands aren't huge, but it's still reasonably legible, particularly the second hand. Now the yellow colour and that super smooth high beat sweep means it stands out, but in a good way. And the pocket shot to finish. If you're not a fan of this green, there's also a red and a black and grey with orange, all limited to 99 pieces each, by the way. Yet again, another nice touch, helping to justify that extra outlay. But what are my moans and niggles today? Well, I honestly don't really have all that much to complain about. Like I've said a couple of times now, it doesn't wear as you would expect a more circular cased 4020 to wear. It wears bigger than that, and 160 grams I think reflects that slightly larger wearing experience. Not a complaint per se, but definitely something you should consider if you are very specific about sizing. Now my macro lens takes no prisoners, but the only real issue I found was with some of the paint fill on the bezel. The 4 looks a tiny bit wonky, but really, you'd struggle to see that with the naked eye. And the lume, I haven't shown you the lume yet. Now that would normally suggest that it's not great, but that's not the case here. The lume is actually really good. But are you a pessimist or are you an optimist? Now the camera doesn't pick it up as well as the human eye does, but there are actually several different tones of lume here. All C3 X1 grade, but with different paint colorations. The bezel from triangle round to 20 has one colour, the rest of the bezel has a second colour, and the second half of the bezel is actually brighter than the first. Similarly, the sandwich dial and hands have the same tone of lume, but the hands are much brighter than the dial. When I crank the speed up properly on it, you can see the sandwich dial is the first thing to go. Now at the end of the 20 minutes it's all still clearly legible, but it obviously would have been better if the dial was still as bright as the hands, and it would have been better if the first half of the bezel was as bright as the second half of the bezel. If you're an optimist, the lume at the end of the 20 minutes is good and that's all that matters. But if you're a pessimist, it's good, but it could have been slightly better. The lume crown though is another one of those nice touches. But talking of could have done better, my only material complaint at this price is that I would have loved to have had some kind of on-the-fly micro adjustment built into that clasp. I do like this style of clasp, but once you're pushing a fair way north of 500, I think on-the-fly becomes, if not mandatory, then certainly preferable. And my final complaint is regards to their website. They don't actually show you how this case is constructed. If you're buying a super compressor, chances are you're buying it because you're a bit of a nerd and you actually understand what that means. I would have loved to have seen a render or perhaps some actual photos of the case showing how the compressor works, showing me the tech, showing me why I chose this specific model. It seems like a bit of a waste having the feature, but then not making more of it in the sales listing. Christopher Ward, for example, shows you exactly what it means by exposing the case back and making it all shiny and colourful. But overall, this has been a bit of a surprise. They're a small brand with a relatively low profile, and yet they're able to offer a really interesting and well-resolved watch for what I think is a fair price. Made in Germany, but with a Swiss movement. Not just any Swiss movement, but an elaborate grade that is then regulated. Some nice touches, including that lume crown, solid looking and feeling case back, colour matched symmetrical date wheel, sandwich dial, and an interesting case shape overall. A lovely bracelet with a good clasp, and no real flies in the ointment. It may be a slightly awkward price point, but this one definitely has me looking up towards Oris and Zin rather than looking down towards Citizen and Seiko. So there you have it, a bit of a surprise package. To be honest, this Circular Super Sport, I like it far more than I thought I was going to. I should definitely therefore have reviewed it far sooner than I did. The pricing may be slightly awkward, but I genuinely think this one has more in common with the entry-level luxury stuff that I've looked at, rather than the mid-tier Japanese or more affordable micro brands that I've looked at in the past. Thank you for making it all the way to the back end of the video. I've only reviewed 2 other compressors, like I said. You should probably check out one of those other 2 reviews now. All the best. I hope to see you again in the future.